Hi, everybody. It's Jeff here, and I saw a post on LinkedIn by Karen, and I want to address the point that you're mentioning here because I've been working on. Sorry, I got a little background noise here, but um, I've been working on a bunch of different video book series on my YouTube channel. One's understanding working with Americans, another was working with the French, another's working with the Germans. And I'm got a few others coming for other cultures too, but and I think that your post here about the experience of being laid off and as the first time, and then having never been laid off since you were 14 years old, and what that made you think of the whole employed equals a good worker and unemployed equals a bad worker. I think it's a very pertinent and interesting, an important topic, and I want to kind of address it here in this video. And I'm going to put this in my different video series on working with Americans, well, understanding work from the Americans, and then working with the French and stuff. And because this really does relate in different ways to those videos series or books or what do you want to call them. I grew up in the United States and until I was 23, and then I moved to France, and then I went back for 4 years, so I've always worked to the States and came back. So I've kind of lived in France for the majority of the past 30 years, plus more than 30 years, and with only a kind of a 4 year stint in the middle of that. Or 5 years, because there's 1 plus 5, 4 years in that whole 30 plus year period, and working back in the States. But and having lived in other countries and worked internationally, pretty much worked with all cultures and from people all over, from Asia, from Africa, from the Caribbean, from South America, North America, just all of Western and Northern Europe and Southern Europe, and even people and anyone in the entire uh, you know uh, even in all the stand countries, Russia, Ukraine, the whole thing. So, and Australia and the Pacific Islands. Let's say I've worked with a lot of people from a lot of different countries. And I think the important thing here to look at, there are a couple things to consider here, is this good worker equals employed versus bad worker equals unemployed. Kind of comes from the Industrial Revolution, right? Where that became a huge job market, yeah, about 150 years ago, and and or remember a little bit more, yeah, a little bit more in that time frame. The exact years. There's no really exact years. I mean, we kind of know what it is, right? And there are lots of good books about this. The Jungle was a good book. Darn, I can't remember the name of the author. I'm trying to think of it. Starts with the last name starts with an S. I'm sorry, but I can't. I didn't look it up before I did this video. This is kind of impromptu video. Um, but I think that there's some. I think that this is important to see that there was the old world local culture, local village, local thing of what a worker is. You're a hunter or gatherer, right? Um, and then the Industrial Revolution kind of changed all that because international migration to find a better life in another country, right? Uh, and that kind of changed the whole migration thing, the whole New World thing, moving to the Americas, what they called afterwards, um, which was basically a takeover of another continent, right, by Europeans, or several other continents in the Western Hemisphere by Europeans, and this whole good worker thing came and became to really become a thing because you had skills that you could do, and it wasn't just your skills to survive, like real survival skills as hunting and gathering, right? It got to where you had skill sets that would be valued by companies, right? That were doing production, manufacturing, or whatever you want to call it, services, and it became something where you'd become globally, or you could move to another country and you would be more valuable in another country, even if you're in political or economic exile, or even religious exile. Like there were a lot of reasons for exile for the whole new world, right? And so what happened is that developed something that created this skill set, the need for specific skill sets. And now we're in a global, economy where you can pretty much work remotely, right? And so this has become even more fine tuned and honing down on some of these things. And I mean, I've worked in a lot of industries. I mean, my LinkedIn profile, there's no bluffing there. There's no bluffing in my LinkedIn profile. And so I've worked in a lot of different things. And so I've got a lot of different skill sets I can use, and I can move them around and use them as I want. And I really identify what you're saying here about the whole, having worked since you're 14. I started working, I'm pretty sure that's when I started getting my first true paychecks, right? Other than the paper route and the berry picking, right? And doing and babysitting and all that kind of stuff, which I did too, right? And house sitting or whatever. That had other ways of compensation. I worked in Nike territory, right? So Nike headquarters, so you got free shoes when you did free Air Jordan shows when you did house sitting for a week, all right? Or cash or whatever. But the whole thing, I've been working since 14 too, and there have been two times when I've been laid off. For Usually they happen during world economic crises. So that kind of happens. And those are the times when I realized that, but I was able to bounce back immediately because I got a lot of skill set that I can change around, right? So I can use my skill sets to move, no problem. But these moments where you don't have a job anymore because you're no longer valuable, right? You're no longer valuable for for that market at that period of time. Is a kind of an eye-opening thing, as you said. Um, but I never lived, never stayed off the job market for, a month, maybe 6 weeks. Just finding, because I had to find some of the other jobs in other countries, right? So it kind of depends. So that makes it a little more complicated. But back before COVID time, back before our COVID kind of remote thing, now it's a whole different kind of thing, right? But I think it's really important to see here is the I think you're key thing about the value of that you're if you're employed you are valuable. If you're not employed you're not a bad value, and that comes from that whole industrial revolution thing. I talk about more about this in my video series about understanding working with Americans. I talk a lot more about that. I do mention it in my series about working the French too, because there is this concept of staying in the company for a long time. That's changing. That is changing, and a lot more mobility. But there is a major distinction here too of being able to be. Look at the whole thing of job hopping too. I know that the whole thing of job hopping has been coming up more recently, especially with the great resignation and all that, and jumping around, and you can do what you want and stuff. And I did job hop a lot when I was much younger, because I could. I could do it, and I could get way better, interesting roles, right? Up high at the ladder. Did a lot, and got some really cool jobs, cool titles. Didn't always mean that I had a team to work with. That I was so-called I would have a team, but I don't always have that. But when I got there, I was kind of surprised. But this whole thing of if you can, the important thing is that so for like Anglo-Saxon cultures, job hopping is acceptable, and it's actually valuable because you can actually. It's good that you're able to move around, and that shows you can adapt quickly to a new environment. Whereas in European countries, that's seen as bad because you need to be in a long place in a long time to be stable, right? So this mentality, these different mentalities play into this, right? So if you're jumping around, you're unemployed sometimes, right? At certain points, and so you get holes. Now, look at LinkedIn. They even have a special thing called "I've got a career break" feature, right? So they're allowing for that opportunity to be able to say that. But being laid off, I mean, there are several skins in the onion on this one, right? So it's not just a single linear thing here. There are multiple factors. So the question is being employed or not, and then for how long or not, and being able to find yourself a job in the job market. A lot depends if you have one skill set or many of them, right? So it helps to have a lot of different skill sets to do it, but that can actually get you into other situations where you got to have different resumes or CVs to be able to explain different skills, because then you have come with a whole skill set of all these different skill sets, and just people are lost. The HR people don't know what to do with you, right? Because you don't show that you get a single linear point of view, right? And I think this comes into this. If you've got to know, the kind of person are you? Are you a linear person that's always done the same thing for a long time in the same field, everything? Or are you a person that's worked in a lot of different fields, and then you've got to kind of hide those different fields, or kind of name them or show them in a way that shows you get skills, so you can use transferable skills to another job in another thing. And I mean, I've made a lot of different resumes of my work, depending who I'm aiming for, right? And 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 this comes into now as, I mean, your post was not about finding a job; it's about being laid off from a job, right? But then that comes into play too, is there are skill sets, or there are jobs where the market's fluctuating, right? So this world market is fluctuating. It's no longer based on long term stuff. It's built on a lot of short term stuff, right? So a lot of short term vision, short term skills, short term all this and that. It's all ROI based, rather than sometimes it's trying to make sure that you get the shareholders and the stockholders and all those. They're the ones that are happy, right? Whereas rather than the company itself happy. That when you work in small companies, you get this. You want to keep the routine, the knowledge, right? You don't want to let the people go. Whereas big companies are going to have a lot of it's a profit margin thing. So sometimes a lot of that leads to a lot of mergers and acquisitions, which I've talked to in my merger and acquisition playlist, which can be used to show profit. Though there's no profit, and then you're going to lay off people after you get the acquisition. I mean, a lot of this is done, right? So it's not just during the layoffs don't happen just during downturns, right? Of economic downturns. They actually, sorry, get the background noise. But sometimes these layoffs happen after an acquisition, to be able to play on the profit margin aspect, right? To show that you've gotten profit, but you actually didn't do anything but buy a company, right? So this plays in play, and see again. There's no there's no play on. There's no the value. The people are still as valuable, but you've chosen to get rid of people just to show that companies do this to show that they got profit that year, right? But they didn't do anything. Sorry, I got the background. There's people moving the chairs, but so I think this is really key, right? This is really key to be able to figure out, to understand your value, okay? And as you said, you're in the middle of this, right? It's the first time it happens, and I've been through it a number of times, and I just found ways to refocus it, to resell the skill set differently, to do things that show, be able to leverage that. And I encourage you, just kind of, sorry, the video's 13 minutes, but this is not something people go to see coaches to go through this, and they spend more than 13 minutes, right? So talking about it and getting advice. So I'm just trying to give my advice in one direction back, on this, but this is something these are important things for people to think about, right? And we got to think about the history of how sorry, I got the background noise here again, but this kind of thing is just, this whole thing is looking at how you can, what's your value, right? It's your whole value, and like, how do you set your value and all that, and your value is always there. It just depends on how other people perceive your value, right? And how they're going to, does your skill sets and the value of those skill sets, do they correspond with some kind of need at a certain point in time? And sometimes they don't. And so that's something, kind of an important thing to consider, in this global economy, right? Where our skills are no longer, I said, no longer hunter gather at a local level, right? You're no longer like in the village, right? That's the only thing that you're needed. Your thing, it can be needed anywhere. So this is, it's, keep going with it, keep running with it. Contact me if you want some help on it. I always give a lot of free advice. So, because from experience, hey, I learned got the gray hair from a few things. It helps that others don't get the same gray hair, right? So, and a lot of this, there's nothing proprietary or anything out of this kind of stuff. It's just everyone helping each other to succeed in where they're at a certain point in time. So take care. All right.